Good afternoon, members. We are live on webcam. Okay. Could I welcome you to the first Governance and Audit and Standards meeting of this municipal year. I will do some introductions later, but I've got a bit of housekeeping first of all. If the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room and public gallery by the stairwells. Do not attempt to use the lifts. Please assemble the Queen Victoria statue in front of the civic offices. In order to comply with the Guildhall Trust Fire Marshal regulations, if you signed in to the Guildhall, please remember to sign out when you leave the building after today's meeting. COVID-19. This is the first in-person meeting of the committee since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. Please be assured that we have put appropriate cleansing and social distancing measures in place to ensure that this meeting is undertaken in a COVID-secure manner. This has included a request for all attendees to have taken an LFD test within 48 hours of the meeting, the use of the NHS Track and Trace app or attendee log, 2 metre social distancing, the wearing of masks when not seated, a one-way system in the Guildhall and a temperature check upon arrival. Limited public seating has been made available, however. This meeting is also been webcast to allow the public to attend remotely if they should wish to do so. Can I ask members to remain seated throughout the duration of the meeting and to wear a face mask covering unless seated? Live web streaming. May I draw everyone's attention to the fact that this meeting will be live streamed and that the camera zooms in to show the speaker. This is linked to the microphones, therefore can I please remind all attendees to turn the microphones or to speak and then off again once you have finished speaking. Members of the public are also permitted to record the meeting on the understanding that it neither disrupts the meeting nor records those stating explicitly that they do not wish to be recorded. I don't see any members in the gallery here. So what I'd like to do now, if I could, is to ask members and officers to introduce themselves, and then we'll do a better introduction later, but just to start. Could I start with Councillor Simon Bosher?
Councillor Simon Bosher, Chairman.
Yeah, Councillor Leon, and I help represent Nelson Ward.
Councillor Church-Ryder for Central Southsea.
Councillor Stuart Brown from Fratton.
Thank you.
Councillor Daniel Weems for Hillsey Ward.
Thank you, Daniel. Peter, you're out in the limb, Peter, so I'm going to ask you to start and then I'll rush over to Michael.
Both City Solicitor.
Michael Lloyd, Financial Services.
Julian Pike, Deputy Director of Finance.
Paddy May, Corporate Strategy Manager.
Did that not work? Sorry.
Paul Somerset, Deputy Chief Internal Auditor.
Elizabeth Goodwin, Chief Internal Auditor.
Fahadi Das, Assistant Manager at EY.
Helen Thompson, Associate Partner from EY.
James Harris, Senior Local Democracy Officer.
I'll ask officers to come in and explain a bit more what they do before they introduce their item. Okay. Could I particularly welcome back all members, me and Councillor Simon Bosher. Well done. Could I also particularly welcome the new members? And there are 4 new members on the committee this year. We've got Councillor Lee Hunt, who's been around for a while, but we've actually got 3 newly elected members a few months back. So welcome to you, that's Charlotte, Stuart and Daniel. So well done, and hopefully you'll be able to make some contribution this afternoon. Thank you. We're all here, as I said, so there are no apologies for absence. Have any members got any declarations of interest? Okay. The minutes of the meeting of the 5th of March. I hope we clear these, Simon, because me and Lee were the only ones there from today. Can we get feeling for accuracy of matters arising and then see if we can agree them? So I'm going to do them by page. And sorry for some of the confusion for new members on the page numbering, which I myself do find confusing. We'll have to look at that to see if we can start at page 1, i.e. the very first page, and move on. And then it just gets confusing when we go into the reports, or can do, but we can pick that up later on. So can I, accuracy of matters arising then please, page 5. I'll use the big number, page 5. Page 6. Period, you might have to put this up. Under 11, elected members training. The third bullet point, Natasha Edmonds was keen to collect attendance data and so on. A member suggested the group of secretaries could be involved with looking at the training for members, and suggesting evening online training. Has anything happened in that period? I know you've been aware for a while, a little bit. Anything happened in there?
I think some training has been given, but it's been difficult for officers and members to organise it over the pandemic period. But the reality is it can be organised and can accommodate people in the evening if necessary. We've had some planning training dealt with, and we dealt with all the new members as per usual, so I don't think it's that difficult to organise, actually.
No, it wasn't the training itself, Peter. It was involving other people and saying what type of training and going back to their groups to see if they would get some more information from them as to what people would like.
I've had nothing in, but I do periodically ask members what training they would like, and I do sort of point them in the direction of the local government association for various courses. There's no obligation for me to keep records, but I do ask occasionally.
Okay, well perhaps when we get the training report later in the year, we can bring that up.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor.
Page 9, anything before page 9? Members, the third bullet point down there, and Elizabeth, known as Lizzie Goodwin, is here, and I've just spoken because I'd missed it. Some stuff was to be sent out to us, as you will see there, checking whether 9.7 months late was meant and whether the implementation date of January 2021, and triggering a follow-up in April. That information was sent out to members, all members, even new members here, on the 2nd of July. Is that correct, Lizzie? Forget that completely. Okay. Page 10. Anything, members? Page 11. Page 12.
Yes, Chairman, I have on page 12.
Please.
Third bullet point down at the top of the page about a report to be brought in to committee documenting the effects of COVID-19 on our investments. Just wondered where that's sat, and is something coming forward soon, Julian?
We weren't planning on bringing a report forward specifically regarding our treasury management investments, but is it in respect of national commercial property portfolio you're referring to?
The bullet point during the discussion said members asked if it would be possible for a report to be brought forward to this committee documenting the effect of COVID-19 on PCC's investments.
Yeah, I think if I recall, Councillor, that was for the commercial properties manager, Tom Southall, to bring a report back, and I'm not aware that that report has been drafted yet, but there is absolutely no reason why that report can't be brought back to this to a later meeting.
To make a suggestion, if I can, Chairman, I think as we're still sort of going through the tail end of the pandemic and people are talking in terms of a third wave, that probably the next gas committee meeting is probably not the appropriate one to bring that back to, and it might be for the new year.
If it helps, Chair, I did bring some. I did wonder if the commercial property portfolio might come up. I could mention a couple of headline numbers if that helps this meeting for clarification. Okay, the property portfolio has a gross value of 151 million. Interestingly enough, over the period of the pandemic, that value of that portfolio has actually increased by 410,000. So that the value of the properties have actually increased over the last 12 months rather than reduced. Income from the portfolio is circa 8.8 million. And the actual outturn against the budget was 52,000 less than we were anticipating. So in the accounts of the council, at least, the income recognised was, as I say, 52,000 less than the budget. However, we have made a bad debt provision of about 590,000. So whilst we've recognised the income in the accounts, we've also made a bad debt provision because there is a suspicion at this stage that some of that income may become uncollectible.
Okay, Simon. Thank you. Anything else on page 12, members? Page 13? Page 14? Page 15? I'm happy to move the minutes. Simon, you happy to second?
Agreed, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, we now move on to item 4, which is the external auditors report. And I say, Helen, and if you would just give, for new members, a background of why you're here and who you're here on behalf and what you do. I'll give you a couple of minutes, just a brief one, okay? Because there's a lot of stuff in the report itself.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, members. To try and comply, my name is Helen Thompson, as I said earlier. I'm the Associate Partner. My responsibility is to oversee the audit and to sign the Auditor's report on the financial statements for the Council. I've been involved with the Council now for just over 5 years. As we mentioned within the report, we've sought approval for an extension of that for 2 years as we move sort of partly pandemic related, but actually more related to the transition in the value for money arrangements, which I'll talk about in a moment. I'm accompanied by Farhad this afternoon. He's our assistant manager for the audit and has been involved with Portsmouth's audit for a couple of years. He asked to attend to the meeting this afternoon for his own development to understand how we would present our reports to this committee. So I would ask you to be nice. And David White is the other member of our team who you will meet at subsequent meetings. He's the manager for the audit and he will stand in for me if I'm not available to attend. Chair, is that sufficient in terms of an introduction?
That's fine, just to say that every local authority needs to have external auditors.
I'll add that bit. We are a requirement. You can't get away without having an external auditor. We are appointed under the framework that the Council has entered into with public sector audit appointments. So the Council does not directly appoint EY as the auditor. You've chosen to join the framework that is overseen by public sector audit appointments, which I will probably abbreviate to PSAA. So, and please do stop me if we go too much into acronyms and jargon. So the way in which we carry out our work is prescribed by the auditing standards, by the NAO's Code of Audit Practice and by the Local Audit and Accountability Act. So you don't either have an awful lot of say about what we do or how we do it because it's prescribed by that legislative framework. So we are different in the way in which we interact with you, say from how internal audit will, and I'm sure Lizzie will talk about that when she gets to her section.
Okay, members, just to give an overview. Okay, thank you. Can we now move on to item 4? I'll let you introduce Helen, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So I'm not going to go through the report page by page, you'll be very pleased to know, but I do want to give some headlines. So we are presenting our full audit plan to you today. For those members of the committee, and I appreciate it's only 2, you will have seen an outline audit plan at the last meeting. What this does is it summarises our assessment of the risks that we have identified in relation to the audit. So it doesn't set out our entire audit approach, it sets out the areas where we are putting more focus and where we will carry out more extensive work, particularly in relation to the financial statements audit. The risks are set out in an overview form on page 21, and I'm using the large numbers, picking up the chair's point from earlier, of your papers, and then in more detail. And in a moment, I'll ask Farhad to take you through those, again, at a sort of summary level. However, what I'd like to note is that there's no significant change in the areas that we consider to be a risk this year compared with our 2019-20 audit. I should be clear, this is the audit plan for the financial statements that have been produced for the year ending 31st of March 2021 that have been published in draft on the website. You will notice that there is one new area which is in relation to COVID-19 grants, and again Farhad I'm sure will touch on that. When Farhad's done his introduction on the financial statements risks, I'll then pick back up to bring you up to date on our value for money risk assessment and touch briefly on fees. So Farhad, if I can pass across to you.
Thank you, Ellen, for your introduction. The number of risks in the plan are common with the prior year. These risks are set out in summary on pages 21 to 23, then in greater detail from pages 28 onwards. If we go to page 28, the first two significant risks identified are consistent with the prior year, and those are the two fraud risks which we are required to identify under ISA 240. The third significant risk is valuation of investment property and land and building value using existing use value and fair value method on page 30, which is consistent with the prior year. As EUV and fair value method includes market factor, and given the fact that 2020/21 was predominantly influenced by local and national lockdown, we anticipate that valuer might not be able to conduct the site visits, which further increases the risk. This does not mean that valuation cannot be relied upon, but it is deemed area of significant risk. The fourth significant risk is valuation of lakeside assets on page 31, which is consistent with the prior year due to significant value. And we have involved specialists from our side to help us with the review of valuation of the asset at lakeside, and this process is already underway. From page 32 onwards, what we would designate area of audit focus. So these are the areas where there is high inherent risk, but these are not considered to be significant risk to the audit. The first three, valuation of land and building valued at depreciated replacement cost and housing revenue account properties, PFI accounting and pension liability valuation are consistent with the prior year. There is one new inherent risk which is set out in the plan on page 33 of the reporting pack. This is around accounting for COVID-19 related government grant. Clearly, over the course of last year, the City Council has received significant grant from government, both to finance its own activities and also pass through to various sections of Portsmouth like local businesses, etc. We need to make sure that those grants are appropriately recognized and accounted properly in statement of account. The inherent risk on page 34, restatement of CIES and EFA, is consistent with the prior year. The City Council has changed its internal reporting structure this year as well, and therefore, under CIFA code requirements, the Council need to represent its CIES and EFA in line with those new portfolio headings. And what does this mean is the current year and prior year figures would need to be presented per those headings, which ultimately means prior year headings figure are restated in line with new portfolio headings, so we would require to look at that. And the last two on page 34, group account assessment and going concern complies with ISA 570 are consistent with prior year. Thank you.
Thank you, Farhad. I think the important point to make on that last one around going concern, to head off the question, is that our concern is not around the fact whether or not the council is a going concern. Clearly, it will be because of the assumption within Practice Note 10 around the continued provision of services. Our focus is very much around the disclosures within the financial statements, which are linked into an increased area of focus because of changes in the auditing standard, but also because of the risks associated with COVID-19 that started last year and have then fed on through this year. Picking up from Farhad's summary of the financial statement risks, I just want to touch on value for money, which is an area that is specific to local to public sector audits in the UK, not something that you would normally come across in a corporate audit if you are familiar with those. There has been a change, and David introduced this to those who were at the March committee, in what we are required to do under value for money. It's set out in the National Audit Office's Code of Audit Practice, and in summary, we're now required to carry out a much more detailed initial risk assessment against three criteria, each of which have a number of sub-criteria. We're continuing to focus on proper arrangements rather than outcomes, so it's the arrangements that you have to secure value for money in your resources. But we are only required to do additional work if our risk assessment identifies a potential area of significant weakness. At the time of drafting our report, we hadn't completely gone through that work and it go through the review process, but that has now been done, and I can confirm that we have concluded that we don't need to do any further work. We will update that risk assessment, but what that will mean is that effectively we expect to conclude there will be no matters to report. And the other change in relation to the Code of Audit Practice is that we will provide a commentary on your arrangements in the Auditor's Annual Report, which replaces the document that some will be familiar with, which was the Annual Auditor's Letter, and we'll produce that later this year. Finally, and just briefly in terms of the fees, you'll notice on page 56 the audit fees associated with the audit. The base fee, known as the scale fee, is set by PSAA, and I think I've previously talked about the challenges within the wider audit profession, and specifically the challenge about how do you deal with an increased level of focus by our regulator on the quality of the work that we do, and the fact that the fees have significantly reduced over years. PSAA have an approver role to play within this, and you will see that there are various numbers within that table, almost all of which are not yet agreed with PSAA, although some have been agreed with officers. So at the moment, the key point that I want the committee to be focused on is that the fee for the audit is set at the scale fee, which is $115,000, and all of the other numbers are subject to discussion. Just one final thing, and then I'll take any questions, Chair, is just to say that our year-end audit is actually underway. We are intending to bring back our report to the September meeting of this committee, and to date there are no significant issues emerging from that work, and I thought the committee might find that interesting to know. Chairman, happy to take any questions or comments.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Helen. And I'll ask a question. I think I've asked it before, but it's one that dogs me forever, and it's the very first one that comes on later on your page 12, and this is misstatement due to fraud or error. And management is in a unique position to perpetrate fraud. Have we got the correct checks and balances in to identify if that's happening, or to identify that's not happening? Helen.
So I think the important thing to say is that this first risk is something that we do on every single audit. So it is a risk that we always assume will be there. So it doesn't matter how strong the internal control framework can be within an organisation. Should someone wish to do so, they can probably find a way around that. So auditors are naturally sceptical beasts, and it's a requirement of our profession to be that way. So we assume that there is going to be that risk. What I would say in relation to our work in this area is we carry out the work that we're required to carry out under the auditing standard, which is to review your journal entries, particularly those made at the end of the year, particularly manual journals that may be adjusting where expenditure or income is being shown in the accounts. We will look at the assumptions that you've made in deriving accounting estimates. So have you used reasonable assumptions that are based on something that we can go back and check, or that look reasonable under the circumstances? And then we'll look for any unusual transactions. The only other area that we have identified where there is potential for manipulation is the second risk, so the one that is on page 29, which is the risk of fraud in revenue recognition. So that's inappropriate capitalisation of revenue expenditure. And the reason behind that is, the Council has a significant capital programme, but it also has the opportunity to identify expenditure that should be classed as revenue and to capitalise it. So effectively to push the financial consequences of that expenditure down the road a little bit to manipulate the position for the current financial year. Again, this is relatively common in local government audit plans. To answer the question specifically, we haven't identified in our work any significant internal control deficiencies that have been sufficiently serious to bring to the attention of this committee in the past few years. You have internal audit on whom you also place reliance, which will give you a broader framework of assurance around internal control.
Okay, thank you, Helen. So your procedures are extremely robust?
We like to think so.
Okay, thank you. Okay, members, can we note the report? Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Helen. Thank you, Fahad. Thank you. Can we move on to item 5, Internal Audit Performance Status Report, 2nd of July 21. And the Annual Audit Opinion 2021. I'm going to ask Elizabeth, known as Lizzie Goodwin, our Chief Auditor, but again, could you say a few words, Lizzie, as to your functions? Thank you.
Afternoon all. Councillor Madden has said I'm generally known as Lizzie. I do respond to a number of things, but Lizzie or Elizabeth, please. We are the internal audit team, which basically means that we don't focus on the accounts unlike the external auditors. We are interested in the internal control framework for the authority, and we audit anything and everything. We're not technical experts in all areas. So, for example, if we need to undertake a particular audit, we are experts in risk and control, and that is what we are assessing. If we need to get some advice, then we will acquire that as we go through the reviews. So on an annual basis, we have an annual plan. I have to perform a risk assessment across the whole of the organisation to determine which activities across the council will be subject to a review. They are included in the plan if they are a significant risk, and that's also balancing the resource that we have available to us. We will undertake reviews and sign off on grants if there is a requirement for us to do so, and we are duty bound to undertake investigations or reviews in relation to fraud, bribery, corruption or theft. And that's because our remit falls within the Section 151 officer. That officer happens to be Chris Ward, and he's the Director for Finance. So you can expect from us on a regular basis, the plan was already approved. However, any amendments to the plan will be brought to this committee so that you are aware of any significant movements. You do agree the plan, and you generally agree the plan in March, which is why it's already been approved, because it was part of last year. Going beyond that, we actually cover a number of other organisations, and I think for transparency perhaps we can just flag that. So whilst I'm the Chief Internal Auditor for Portsmouth, I also cover Southampton, Isle of Wight, Solent Lep. Paul covers Gosport, and he also covers Portico. So just for a little bit of context. So the report that is in front of you today is a progress report. It's in relation to 2021's planned audit activities, and on an annual basis I also bring along a report to you that says what's our overall opinion in relation to that internal control, assessment and environment, which is the second paper. There will be a number of other papers that will come along during the course of the year. Perhaps as and when we do that, I will flag then as to why we are involved, because they're not within the normal remit of audit. Councillor Madden, are you happy for me to go on and present a paper?
Yeah, just to confirm that you are independent.
We are independent. Whilst we are employed by the organisation, any reports that or any items of work that are performed only go out in the name of the Chief Internal Auditor. So we sit to one side. I physically report into the Director of Finance, and that is because of their role as Section 151, but we are classed as an independent advisory assessment function for the authority.
May I ask a question?
Oh, please.
Yeah, thank you. So I did read with interest that you looked at the Isle of Wight and Gosport and other places. Do we have any involvement with that, Mr. Chairman, or would we get to see any of their stuff, or you report to them separately?
A number of years ago, the authorities to which we're now involved in needed chief internal auditors. So they basically share, and we are under contract with them. So for each of those other organisations, so the Solent LEP, you will have clarity, and their reports will be included as part of ours. That's because we are also the accountable body, Portsmouth City Council. In relation to Portico, they will be brought along to this committee as well, because Portico is owned by Portsmouth. For Gosport, Southampton and the Isle of Wight, no, we have mirror committees elsewhere. It's just that for transparency, I am their Chief Internal Auditor as well. So I'm employed physically by you. They pay for some of our time.
Okay, Lizzie, we'd like to introduce the report. Thank you.
So in relation to the first report that we have, it would be our progress report. So as I indicated, it is any items of work that was outstanding that we have not previously reported to you since the last reporting period. We have one item that is outstanding, which is currently in draft. That particular review is the governance review that has been performed on Ravelin. In due course, once we've concluded, that will also be brought to this committee so that you have clarity and transparency around the work that we've performed. So there are 85 odd items that have been covered. The report has to include certain information, which is regular information that you will become familiar with. I've included, and this would be under section 4 of the report, some of the COVID assurance work that we performed, which was in addition to the plan. And that's because we wanted to have some visibility on whether the governance arrangements during the pandemic time, and I know we're still in the pandemic, but over the course of the year, whether we still maintained good controls. So you will see under section 4, there are particular areas that we have included, and that is because those are the areas that we have covered during this time. Moving on, in relation to Section 9, Section 9 includes a number of reports, the first of which is direct payments. I was not intending going into any details because if you require us to answer any questions, we can kind of go through those in that particular detail. But you will see from the information provided to you, direct payments has been rated as limited assurance, and there were a number of risk exposures that were identified. We also have backup and disaster recovery, distributions in relation to Portico, repairs and maintenance for Portico, workforce planning, insurance, which is in relation to the Solent LEP, and then a number of other audits, which again are in relation to the Solent LEP, but are presented here, as I said, because we are the accountable body. Under Section 11, part of the work that we also perform is once we have completed an audit, if there are risk exposures and there are agreed actions, and it is the clients that determine the agreed actions because they know and understand their areas and activities better, we need to perform a review to ascertain whether they have done what they said they were going to do in relation to the risk exposure. So Section 11 is the individual audits where we have performed a follow-up, and you'll see we have narrated the original assurance level and then how that assurance level has moved, if that is the case, and it has moved. Because there were some issues and the organisation were not, Portsmouth City Council were not particularly good at implementing what they were going to do, when they were going to do it, we introduced last year a second follow-up, which is what is included under section 12. So when it says that it is a second follow-up review, that's because we got to the date that the client said they were going to implement the action. We performed a follow-up review. They hadn't implemented, so we scheduled in another review. It is helping, I think, the organisation keep focus and implement some of those agreed actions, but we still have a bit of an issue. So if I can take each report individually, that's the progress report, and that would close down all bar one item of work, which is in relation to Ravelin. Would you like me to take any questions before moving on to the annual opinion?
Oh, is that okay, Lizzie? Yeah, okay, members. I've got a couple of questions. They're fairly minor, but I think I'll probably do them page. What helps members on this one? Because it's, again, fairly long. Should we do it page by page, or do you want to jump in and just ask questions as it comes along? Let me ask my first one, have a think about it, which is a fairly minor one, Lizzie, but I've got to go back now. And it's... Yeah, it's to do with the COVID bus subsidy, and it's just curiosity more than anything. Where we very kindly sent some money back to the government, not something that we readily do. But is that because the bus services were reduced during COVID?
The reason the funds would be returned, and there were various pockets of grants that were distributed to all councils, so the COVID bus subsidy was a specific grant. The terms and conditions that would have been attached to that, if the council did not have full expenditure to the total of the grant, part of the requirement is you have to return. So I would need to double check the underlying reason as to why we didn't use the entire funds, but for the majority of the time the council had to put through an estimate. If those estimates then didn't manifest into actual expenditure, they simply had to return what they did not spend.
Yeah, so thank you. Thank you, Liz. My next question is on page 77. Anybody got a... Please, Sam.
I'm looking at page 76, Chairman. Lizzie, the blurb at the top of that page, which is talking about direct payments to clients, to me that is rather worrying. Testing found a sample of 25 direct payment clients' support plans or reviews could not be located within System 1 for 16 of the 25. That's a big old figure from your particular sample. It also goes on, it's not possible to locate evidence to show that annual reviews have been undertaken for 18 out of 25, and in cases of a further 3 out of 25 partially meeting that criteria. It seems to me that on your sample of 25, it was a little bit like a Swiss cheese, wasn't it, with the failings there. Having found all that, where's this now going, and what assurances are you having going forward? Because it strikes me, I mean, I've seen a lot of these over the years, and I have to say, normally your worrying risks tend to centre around schools, if I'm honest, but this one is a new one on me.
So as a result of the audit, there is an action plan, and the Director of Adult Social Care has seen the action plan. We will work closely with them. The samples that are taken at random, and it is worrying that we had a high percentage where there were failure rates. It's not necessarily a representative across everything, because on some occasions we can look at a population and there is no issues and later find an issue. But there is an action plan in place, and we will keep a watching brief and undertake a follow-up within this year, and we will undertake that follow-up at the tail end of this quarter, so quarter 2, and we'll bring back to you. And I will also flag again with the director in that particular area. But it is not good findings. I think we recognise that.
Chairman, can I just come back? So the Director of Social Services is taking this action plan. As I seem to remember, it was down to the managers in the department to agree the timescales for their own action plans, which always struck me as being a bit strange. What timescale have they put on that to have that action plan completed and in place, did you say, before you go back?
Can I check during this meeting and actually come back to you? Because
I'm only asking, and perhaps if you could, unless you found it.
I found it, and I don't know why. Apologies. It's on the front of the report. The last action date is June 22. But what I will ascertain for you is there would be a number of actions, and I think one of the latest actions is in relation to a system, a particular IT system. So I think if we get a little bit of clarity with when the majority of them should be implemented. From my perspective, although the client comes up with a proposed action date, if we don't think that that is moving sufficiently quickly, we will challenge and we also won't sign down the piece of work. So can I come back with some finer detail with what is satisfactory?
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind. I mean, you just suggested June next year, so we're effectively talking a year from now to get an action plan in place for this particular thing to be sorted out. And then in theory, you're going to go back in there and hopefully it's going to have a different risk level. I would argue that a year to sort something out as worrying as payments that we can't find is much, much too long, and I would have expected it to be significantly shorter than that. Something like this, to my mind, should be front and centre of that director's thoughts.
I'm going to hand over to Paul because I think he's identified an error in our report.
Oops.
No, just to clarify, it's not an error in our report. We always take the latest date because obviously that's kind of the way we have to do it, but the June 22 date is around reviewing the system and some of the missing documentation. The majority of the actions are due to be completed latest August 21, which will address the main issues, but the long one that goes into 22 is more of a system issue and trying to find some of the old files on the system. So the majority should be August 21 with the main concerns, but there is a longer one regarding reassessing and reviewing the documentation on System 1.
Thanks, Paul. If I remember, Chairman, we tend to have a meeting in August about budgetary stuff and then a meeting in the autumn. I don't know whether the dates have been put in the diary yet, but it would be useful to have something that focuses on this at our meeting in the autumn. I think we usually have a meeting sometime in October, late September, early October, don't we? To have something at that meeting on this so we can make sure that it's actually in place. Because I think we've seen it before, and I don't want to see it again, where managers have missed their own deadlines, and I'd like to, and I think you've sat here before, Lizzie, and said we're still waiting for them to sort it all out. I mean, I think if we look to the autumn for something to come back from your team, if it's at all possible on this, and then we've always got the opportunity for our New Year meeting to actually have the director sat here explaining why they failed in sorting this out. No pressure.
Is that okay? Is that okay, Paul?
Absolutely
Lucy?
fine. We'll schedule something in so it can come back. It's possibly September.
It's September 24th and 5th of November, the next two meetings.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan. I didn't put them in my diary.
September, we'll have an update for you.
I'm not thinking beyond next Monday's council meeting at the moment.
Thank you. It's just a procedural point, really. It's in relation to distribution at Portico. There's lots of little things about Portico, of course, in your audit report anyway. We have had someone from Portico in the past come and address the issues. But it's a low-risk in the past something happened with signing for goods, and now no signatures given. Will this stay on the agenda forever, or will it disappear into the ether? Are you satisfied that the new procedure is fine?
I think from recollection that was a historic audit, and in all honesty it is probably an area that we ought to revisit. COVID definitely altered the arrangements regarding when vehicles were on site and the documentation that they were given. So I think it's probably due another scrutiny. Paul, I don't know if you have any additional information.
Yes, this particular issue that's in the report was around the loading onto the lorry. So previously they would sign for them, but obviously not being able to do that with COVID, they put in a new process where they wouldn't sign. The drivers would watch the lorries being loaded and then wouldn't leave unless they were happy that everything that had been loaded should have been loaded. So they just put in a new process, but obviously it's not quite the signature you'd get on a bit of paper to say it's okay should there be a challenge when the goods get to their destination. So that's why we deemed it as low risk, because we felt there was a mitigating control in there for the current time anyway.
No, that's fine. I mean, it's just I don't want things like this sitting on the agenda forever. If you're happy that you might have another look at it or whatever to make sure that there's nothing untoward. Okay. On the SLEP, or the Solent LEP, there's two high risk areas. They did surprise me when I read them because, we've got all these professionals, not yourselves, dealing with this. There's no evidence of monitoring, as explained in the report, of the applications in the sample. How is this going to be resolved? Both the high risk.
In relation to the high risks, this was a number of processes put in relation to COVID, so they were put in at speed. When we performed the audit, we were looking at the accountable body checks and balances and also the Solent LEP checks and balances. Again, there is an action plan to address this, but there has been a revisit to the roles and responsibilities to ensure that there is clarity around who should be doing what and when they should be doing it. And that is, as I said, on both sides of the equation. The actions that are proposed feed into the assessment of those roles and responsibilities, and we will be performing a follow-up to make certain that the proposed actions have been addressed, but that the narrative around who should be doing what and when they should be doing it is also fit for purpose, considering they are changing some of their processes that are sat underneath. And that should, in theory, resolve the risk exposures that we have.
Okay, thank you. And again, page 84, again, it's SLEP. Same answer for that then, Lizzie, yeah?
Those two particular audits are what has fed into the wider reassessment of who should be doing what and when they should be doing it. And I think that's probably quite a positive thing, because there are a number of themes that you're picking up on, but that they were picking up on and we were picking up on, which is why there has been that additional item of work. So whilst that follow-up element in relation to the Solent LEP, accountable body Solent LEP side, is disappointing that it hasn't been resolved, I think now that all relevant parties have stood back and reassessed what it is that they need to do, we should see some good movement from now on.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Councillor Stewart, Brian Stewart.
Thank you, Chair. And Lizzie, thank you for this report. It's very detailed. I've got a question relating to the sort of the summary of the exceptions on page 88. You've listed there's a total of 163 exceptions from the 85 audits, is that right? So I suppose the question I've got is mostly contextual, and I appreciate you might not have this to hand, but of those 163 exceptions, and especially the high-risk ones, have any of them been raised in previous audit cycles? So are any of them sort of ongoing long-term issues? And if so, obviously we would need to know which ones they are, because if they've been going on for longer than one audit cycle, and I'm assuming it's an annual audit cycle?
It depends, and it depends on the activity.
Yeah, but for some of them, obviously, if they're going on for more than 1 year or even longer, and measures haven't been taken to address them, we probably ought to know that so that we can bash some heads together. And I suppose the second half of my question is, of the 163, how many of them now have control measures in place? And I appreciate, obviously, the date of August 21 was the deadline for most of those, so some of those might not be in place until and able to be reported on until our next meeting. Thank you.
If I answer the second question first, if that's okay. So in relation to is there relevant actions in place, there should be proposed actions definitely in place. They will be at varying degrees as to whether they have been implemented yet or not. And at some stage they will be subject to follow-up, so we'll be able to ascertain whether they have been implemented. The annual audits, we are duty-bound to do all of the key risk areas, and they tend to be something that we term as being our key financial systems. So they're subject to regular reviews, certainly annual reviews. We've changed tact because of the lack of implementing, and then if we do a second follow-up and we still don't get an implementation, what we're doing is we're throwing the whole thing back in the pot and we're revisiting the whole of the activity. And that's to give us perhaps a little bit of comfort that we haven't lost sight of the bigger picture, and to also give a judgment around if the risk hasn't been mitigated but it also hasn't manifested, do we need to go down a different path? So there is some additional work and additional paths that we're going down. I would probably need to double check of the 69 which ones are reoccurring. We do have a good habit though of bringing back the ones that are reoccurring to you, which is why Councillor Bosher usually knows which ones is causing us problems. But I can do that so that you have some greater transparency, if that's helpful.
That'd be wonderful, thank you.
If I can, just Chairman, just for Stuart's benefit, we do get sight. Lizzie is very, very good at giving us sight of the problem ones, and it's something that she's got a card up her sleeve that she doesn't often play. I think it's been played once, and I think it got around very quickly, that we can summon whoever the manager is to this committee to explain to us why they're not meeting their own action plan, bearing in mind that they are the ones that set the timeline for it. It happened once with one senior officer who sat here to the very end of the meeting. I think I was chairman at the time. Kept them here all afternoon, waiting on a Friday afternoon to the very end, and then they got a grilling about it. And surprise, surprise, when Lizzie goes to other officers and says, you're not meeting your audit plan, you go to governance and audit, it's surprising how quick those action plans get put into place, isn't it? That we do have that ability to bring people here if we do.
No comment from Lizzie, obviously. Right. I have to say we have invited people in the past who haven't bothered to turn up, so it doesn't necessarily work for us. We'll have to think if we come to such a circumstance throughout the year, what we're going to do about it. Members, anything else on this? I have something in Appendix B, but it's just more comment than anything else. And that would be page 102 and 103 in relation to counter-fraud and unplanned reactive work. There's some good results there. I'm not too sure how you identify fraud, because it's never that obvious, is it? But, you know, I mean, some money has been got back. I suppose the one that sort of struck me, really, was the right to buy. Because I can't really work out how you could defraud us if you're buying one of our council houses. But nevertheless, there has been some fraud or fraudulent claims there, right? And so the counter-fraud are reviewing all applications from a fraud risk. Does that actually stop applications going through for a while, Lizzie, and how would they identify a fraud risk? Yeah, if you're allowed to tell us.
fraud assessment, there are areas where are more susceptible due to the nature of the activity. There is also experience, national trends, regional trends that helps with the intelligence gathering. We have a very good whistleblowing arrangements in place at Portsmouth City Council. We have a number of checks and balances in relation to the data analytics that we use, which is the IDEA software that enables us to have a look at whole populations. There is always an element, though, of you never quite know what's below the waterline. So there is an element equally that we only know what we identify and what emerges perhaps through some of the testing. We're duty-bound, like the external auditors, to follow our nose in relation to any concerns. So there's good mechanisms for issues or concerns to come up. In the event that we are concerned, we will undertake some additional work to satisfy ourselves, but it comes back a little as well. We can look at and perform sample testing. And do you know what? Maybe if we'd looked at the 26th item, it was that item that showed that there was a fraud that was occurring. So it is a little subjective as well. As an authority, though, we do have some good arrangements in place.
Okay, thanks, Leslie. Please, Fiona, Councillor
Thank you, Chair. I just had a couple of questions in relation to page 95. I noticed, Lizzie, that there is a line item on culture, leisure and regulatory services, but there isn't anything in terms of the data on that, so just a quick question about why there isn't. And then in terms of the graph there that shows the assurances by directorate, I was just wondering why some areas are better than others. Is it just because with something like finance and resources, by the nature of the systems and processes related to finance, it's easier to assure, or is there something sort of inherently wrong in some of the directorates that need more work? Or just, for context, please.
So in relation to culture, leisure and regulatory services, during the year of 2021, we had some full audits to perform in that particular directorate, but because of COVID, there were a number that were taken out of the plan and a number that were put in. Culture and leisure and regulatory services did not have any full audits, which is why that's not showing anything against them. They won't have that pleasure this time round because we'll be auditing them, or we aim to. The picture is difficult, I think, to clarify some of the services. So no directorates within Portsmouth City Council causes me significant concern. There are pockets throughout, and that generally tends to be the nature of the activity. Financial systems tend to be very well controlled because they are very practiced. There is a number of professionals, there's a number of standards, and there's a number of legislative requirements that sit behind. So whilst we've included that as a diagram, it probably doesn't help you have much clarity around which are the ones that we should be keeping a bit of a watchful brief. The areas where there is a lot of documentation, systems that are manual and automated and involve multiple parties are probably the areas that start to go a little awry. But there isn't any one particular directorate. Children's and adults may be more subject to the paperwork not being as robust, but that's because there is an enhanced amount of paperwork that is involved. So it's probably not entirely answering the question, but for inherently risky areas, they tend to be the better controlled ones because the framework's well established.
Okay. Okay, Sean. Okay, thank you. Oh, look, I have nothing else on the report other than anybody else could on this one, please.
It just relates to page 102 and the business grants. With COVID and the business grants obviously having to be administered quickly, how did you reach a consensus on how to incorporate the new risks for future audits? Obviously, with the business grants being such a substantial amount of money, how did obviously PCC manage the risks with fraud and obviously the rest of the grants being administered?
For each of the grants that were new in relation to the either business grants or discretionary grants, central government issued a plethora of requirements, which I have to say they then changed on a regular basis. There were a number of assessments and assertions that the local authorities they had to either complete an assessment and narrate the arrangements that they would put in place. So central government, whilst giving the authority these large pockets of money, made it very clear what their expectations were. And for the relevant schemes, those requirements then fed into the processes and the documentation and the applications that were put in place for Portsmouth City Council to be able to administer these. So there was already a very structured approach, be it that some of those areas that central government portrayed or included, it was subjective or down to the authority as to whether they implemented them or not. There are certain pockets within the organisation that I said for the previous question that are very well controlled. Revs and bends tend to be very well controlled, and they're quite practiced with having a good control environment in place. And that's basically the arrangements that we had here. They also pulled upon internal audit to give advice and to do an initial assessment with what they were proposing. And we also did additional work at the back end to see how effective those arrangements were that they put in place at that time. And then any lessons learnt were fed back into the new schemes.
Okay, Daniel. Okay, Councillor Williams. Thank you. Can I only agree with recommendations, members, that the audit performance and results for 2021 to the 2nd of July this year, any highlighted areas of concern in relation to audits completed from the 2021 audit plan indicating follow-up, and the annual audit report and opinion for 2021. Is that agreed? Thank you. Thank you, Lucy. Could I just say to members, and particularly new members, as Simon will know, if you have any concerns or worries about audit, external or internal, Helen's more than happy to put you in the right direction as needed, as indeed is our venerable city solicitor. So out with this meeting, if there are any concerns, if you have anything, do contact me. Thank you very much then. So item 6 is Treasury Management Out-of-Turn Report for 2021. Michael Lloyd, but Julian's also here as well. So if you'd like to do a bit of it, introduce yourselves and what you do. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. As I say, my name's Julian Pike. I assist the the Director of Finance, downgrading him. I assist the Director of Finance in the discharge of his responsibility to ensure the proper financial administration of the organisation. That role is quite wide-ranging. It covers the collection of all incomes due to the council, including council tax and business rates, through to all payments made by the organisation. It's also responsible for the setting of the budgetary and financial frameworks that are operated by the council, including the setting of its medium-term financial strategy. And it also is responsible for the management of the day-to-day cash flows and the management of surplus cash of the organisation, which is what the report that my colleague Michael Lloyd is here to present to you this afternoon.
I'm Finance Manager for Technical and Financial Planning, which means that I manage a team which looks after the council statutory accounts, its treasury management, its banking, and its VAT. Now, treasury management is essentially the management of the council's cash, i.e. its borrowing and its investments. In terms of treasury management, we report to this committee, the council and the cabinet a number of times each year, starting out in March with the treasury management strategy report, which, as the name suggests, sets out the council's strategy. In particular, it sets out its investment criteria, because the council currently has around £400 million invested, and it also has around £770 million of borrowing. So they're quite large figures. And then each quarter we come back to this committee and we report to you on the current treasury management position. Hopefully, as we will be today, we can reassure you that our treasury management position is within the prudential and treasury management indicators, which are set out in the council's budget report and our treasury management strategy. The key prudential indicators are the authorised limit on borrowing. So each February the council sets its budget and its capital programme, and it also sets out a limit above which the council's borrowings will not exceed. There are some other indicators as well, including an operational boundary of debt, which is effectively an early warning system should we be in danger of breaching our authorised limit. And other indicators are the ratio of financing cost to net revenue stream, because clearly the greater the council's financing costs, which are largely fixed, the less flexibility the council's got to manage its budget. There's also limits on the amount of long-term investments we have, i.e. investments over a year, because clearly the more long-term investments we have, the less flexibility we have on liquidity to pay our bills as they fall due. And there's also limits on our debt maturity profile, which should be reasonably even, because if it's not, we could end up having to borrow large sums of money when interest rates are high, which obviously wouldn't be good. Happy for me to move on to the report itself now, Chair?
Oh, please do.
Yeah. Okay. So what we're taking to you today is our Treasury Management Outturn Report for 2020-21. The report will go on to the Cabinet and Council, so it's brought to this committee for scrutiny. As I said, we are within our prudential and treasury management indicators. In the first quarter of the financial year, we did borrow £60 million from the Public Works Loans Board at the Housing Revenue Account certainty rate, and those loans had an average rate of interest of 1.17%, so they were very cheap, and they were taken to finance a housing revenue account or council housing capital programme. In terms of our investments, we made an average return of 0.99%. Some investments made a better return than others, and happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Michael. I have to say, Michael, I've said before, and I think you think I'm joking, but I'm not. I do enjoy reading this report, and I'm fascinated by interest rates and all the rest of it. I should take your advice on investment, Michael, shouldn't I? Because I might have a few bob in the bank. Amazingly, I have no questions. Either I'm immune to it now, Michael, or I've been beaten into submission. Any questions or points from any members? Well, Michael, we're all immune.
Okay.
Now, thank you for that. Members, I need to then, the recommendation is that the actual prudential and treasury management indicators based on the unaudited reports as shown in Appendix B be noted. An explanation of the prudential and treasury management indicators is contained in Appendix C. This report will go on to Council on the 12th of October. Okay, members, agreed? Thank you. Thank you. Item 7 then is the draft annual governance statement. Welcome, Paddy. I haven't seen you for a while.
Yes, Madam, indeed. Yep.
I think it might be easier to explain what you don't do, Paddy, than what you do, but I'll let you tell us your role.
Okay, thank you. So I'm Paddy May, the Corporate Strategy Manager. The Strategy Unit is a small team, and we report directly to the Chief Executive. We support some of the key policy areas for the Council, such as health and wellbeing, community safety, climate change. And then we support some of the key partnerships that relate to that as well as a couple of the other ones, such as the Armed Forces Covenant and the Partnership for South Hampshire. We support the Chief Executive and Directors directly on corporate projects that often don't have a home that fits with one directorate. In terms of the report that you've got today, in this context, we also undertake performance management, working with directors, report to this committee and to Cabinet. And so, for example, we have the annual governance statement, the performance reports. My colleague Kelly Nash looks after this area of work, and I'm covering her report for her today.
Oh, thank you, Paddy. Would you like to introduce the report? Thank you.
So the annual governance statement is presented every year and sets out how we as a council try to make sure that we do the right things in the right way for the right people in a timely, inclusive, open, honest and accountable manner. We bring the document in draft form to the Governance Audit and Standards Committee to allow for challenge and also for comments and perspectives of this committee so it can be incorporated into the final document. The draft statement highlights how we organisationally adhere to the 7 principles of good governance, and more detail of that is given in the local code of governance, which has been refreshed and is in Appendix 2 of the report. It also identifies things where there may be areas where we need to pay particular attention to in the coming year. For 21-22, there are 7 main issues which have been identified as important from a governance perspective, and these are actually set out in the draft annual governance statement as Appendix 1. I'm not quite sure how they fit on your page numbers, but in the actual governance statement they're page 15. These are around how we re-establish business as usual after the pandemic response phase, and I guess the example we had previously around Portico would be an example of that. How we continue to ensure resilience of our IT systems, how we operate in new ways of working, for example as commercial partners, how we comply with new statutory duties and expectations, how we maintain financial resilience, how we ensure robust governance around health and care services in the context of the changing NHS structures with the new integrated care systems, and also how we maintain capacity within the organisation, particularly in the health and care sectors. The draft document also contains the annual opinion of the Chief Internal Auditor, Lizzie, as outlined in her report today. I'm happy to receive comments on the draft, which can be incorporated into the final document, which will be presented alongside the Statement of Accounts for the organisation later in the year. And the recommendations are to approve the draft subject to comments and also to approve the fresh local code at Appendix 2.
Well, thank you, Paddy. And of course, this is to be signed off by the Leader of the Council and the Chief Executive, though I don't see it going to Council at any time. It's not Chief of Council in October.
Yes, it will come back here before as well, so in that final form.
I have no questions on this, Paddy, but I have to say that I do find Appendix 2, the Local Code of Governance, excellent and a very good training document, I must say. So I shall keep this bit of this report. just to remind myself what I'm supposed to do. Any questions or points, members? No? Okay, thank you. Paddy, thank you very much. What am I looking at? That we agree the Annual Government Statement 2021 Appendix 1, and we approve the refreshed Local Code of Governance Appendix 2. Is that agreed, members? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Paddy. God, I need an assistant, don't I? I know there's not of you bother telling me, because you're not listening to what I'm saying, are you? Item 8 is consideration of the political balance rules in relation to the constitution of subcommittees considering complaints against members. Peter, the one thing I did notice in the bit of training I did was there was no mention at all of standards. And maybe that's something we need to look at. But could you just, before we go into this report, could you just do a few minutes with members as to what might happen to them where there's a complaint against a member?
First of all, some of you may know that I'm the City Solicitor and Monitoring Officer of Portsmouth City Council, so my obligation is to try and maintain legal probity of officers, members and colleagues. That's quite an interesting task, let alone anything else I may or may not have to do in the day job. One of the things that pops up every year is the disapplication of the political balance rules relevant to members' complaints. In terms of members' complaints, there is a process whereby a complaint can be put to me, member on member, or member of the public to member, and depending on which way it is dealt with by a process essentially owned by me. And the first part of that is the initial filtering panel, in the sense of whether a complaint is prima facie made out to go on to the process of being looked at and dealt with properly. Now that filtering panel is difficult to sort of provision in the sense that sometimes complaints come in as against more than one member or a group of members in one go. So my cohort for people to look at it is, if you are exercising political balance, quite difficult to sometimes fulfil. It's also not assisted by the fact that certain members will potentially be conflicted by the nature of that particular complaint. So what we do every year is, in order to give the standards governance some sort of process that isn't stymied at the very initial stage, we disapply the political balance rules, and it's only relevant to conduct of complaints. It's not respect of any other subcommittees, it's just this one. And if we were going to disapply it, you have to do it on a unanimous basis, and you have to look at it every year if there is a change in your political makeup, which inevitably, in Portsmouth City Council terms, means that this will pop up. Leah's quite right, it seems to pop up all the time, but actually it only pops up once a year. And it's the same question every year that I put in respect of, please will you disapply the political balance so that I can have a reasonably easy time for the rest of the year. And I put it no finer than that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think that's introduced in the report as well, Peter, I think, isn't it? Yeah, okay, thank you. Any questions, members? Because I don't know if there's any complaints at the minute. I haven't been notified of any, Peter.
I'm going to set myself a difficult task by saying, unfortunately, there are no complaints, which means there will be a cascade of complaints following next week. But there you go. So far, so good this year.
Okay, so members, it's really also to get a bigger cache, isn't it? You get a bigger pool of members. So we would include standing deputies as well in this.
Yes, that's correct.
I think, Leo, it's also an element for the benefit of other members is the fact that if you were to follow political proportionality, you could find yourself with the subcommittee loaded with one particular party ruling on one of their own. So to spread it means that it becomes even. But I have to say, and I think you're the same, Leo, in all the complaints that I've sat in over the years, everybody that comes from this committee and does it leaves their political persuasions at the door and judges it on the merits of the case in front of them. And I have to say that's one of the things that works really well about this process.
You're absolutely right, Simon. We have to anyway, don't we? We have to be as independent as possible when it comes to these. And we do have the help, of course, of independent members as well, sitting on the panel. Members, can we agree these recommendations then, that the political balance is applied in respect of governance and audit and standards subcommittees, which are considering complaints against members, and also the same arrangement should apply in respect of initial filtering panel membership? Is that agreed? Thank you very much. Thank you.
One thing I was going to say before you move on, Chair, is that I was going to say I think the new members should be commended to the previous report relevant to the annual governance statement in respect of pages 129, 139 to 142, which is an extremely good exploration of what the statutory position is for various officers in the authority and what they're supposed to do in terms of economic sufficiency and the like. So as a piece of learning, I think you should all have a good look at that. Thank you.
Thank you. We now move on to item 10, which is procurement. Where is it? What's it called? But before that, we've got to do item 9, which is the exclusion of the public and press. I mean, there aren't any here, but we've got to do it formally anyway. That's only in relation to the confidential papers that you've got in front of you. We have papers that are in the public domain. So what we would normally do is address those papers to see if there's any points, the white papers, but agree now to go into confidential session, which we will need to do, I think, on some of these, so that we can deal with the confidential papers. So is that agreed, members, that we exclude the public and the press? Thank you. Thank you. Richard Locke's here. Richard, you have given us a massive report, as you promised, right, at the last meeting. So we're only talking about item 10, the white bit at the minute.
Yeah, that's
Richard, is there anything you want to say to that, yeah?
That's correct, Councillor Madden, yes. Do you want me to give an overview of my role and my team's role quickly as well?
Absolutely, sorry, yeah.
Okay, I'll try and make it as interesting as possible for you. I'm Richard Locke, I'm the Council's procurement manager. I head up a relatively small team of professionals and trainee professionals. We have quite a good academy approach in the Council. Our primary roles are to make sure that we procure in line with statute, which is public contract regulations, among many other aspects, and our own local contract procedure rules, and that we do that in accordance with best value principles. So compliance can't be the end means, it's got to be compliant and achieving best value for the taxpayer. We get involved in all manner of things, but a lot of our work is project focused, assisting services directly. So we're not a procurement police function, we work directly with services and undertake procurements directly ourselves. So a lot of my team is focused into tendering, that's kind of procurement life cycle basis. What we do is we take services through the whole of the procurement life cycle, so that's identifying the need, the options appraisal, through to getting the sourcing and contracting strategy, assessing the bids and formulating that into an effective contract, and then into contract management. The services generally picked up most of the contract management, and we seek to provide a level of support, but it's an area that we have quite limited resource that we're seeking to address in the future. More and more our activities are in pre-procurement, which is around soft market testing with providers, also looking at whether or not going to the market is the best thing to do anyway, whether we've got an in-house provision or looking at alternative means like tech or companies we could set up or shared services arrangements. So we more and more get involved in that front end, which is where most of the value is actually added. On top of that project basis, we also get involved in a lot of strategic pieces of work. So we're involved in the social value policy that came forward last year and how we implement that through procurement. Involved in looking at what we can do to get better assurance on modern slavery in supply chains, what we can do in respect of also looking at aspects of living wage and bringing things like that in the future if that's what the council wants to pursue. That's essentially us in a nutshell. Do you want me to move into the report now, Councillor Madden? Thank you. So This report follows the same kind of structure as previous reports. It focuses on 3 primary areas. One area of spend compliance, I was unable to provide you with the report in time for when the packs went out. Since then, I have managed to get a report out of the Fusion system, which I've received in the last couple of days. I've done a review of the report that's come through, and I can send the exempt spreadsheet directly across. I've got it in front of me now, so I can send it immediately following the meeting. What I'm happy to say is that from 71% compliance, and what I mean by that are the number of contract entries that we have up on our system that show who we're spending money with and why, and we have to do that for anything above £5,000 in accordance with Transparency Code, has gone from 71% to 92%. So that is the best we've ever been, and that's largely down to the work of not just my team, but lots of work in Jules's team significantly as well through the Fusion project. So that's a significant benefit we're seeing through the Fusion project. To put that in context, that is roughly around about £15.7 million of contractual spend just for May, and of that isn't linked to compliant contract entries, there's 1.3 million approximately. When I've since gone into that data and looked at whether or not that is truly non-compliant, so is it that we do have a contract that just hasn't been linked to, that's actually gone all the way up to 99%, which just leaves us of 1%, so about just over £200,000, which is by far the best we've ever been. Going through the areas, through adult services, there is nothing above our 100k tender threshold there, nothing significantly close to the statutory thresholds. In children's, there was one particular transaction which was just under 100k, but that essentially is a public-to-public trading transaction between us and the Ministry of Justice, where we've got a single source, so we can't effectively tender anyway. In housing, neighbourhoods and buildings, there was one significant transaction of over £4 million, which is linked to construction works to construct Patey Court. That is actually fully compliant. I was directly involved in the procurement. It's just that the contract wasn't on the system. Once that's taken off, it significantly changes the results. The rest of the transactions are primarily to do with temporary accommodation with hotels and bed and breakfasts. But again, we have a compliant arrangement in place. It's just that the system needs to be updated so that the entries can be added. Regeneration have significantly improved their compliance levels, and there was only one transaction above £100,000, and that transaction I was involved in directly, and I know that that is off of a compliantly procured framework. Culture, there was again one transaction above £100,000. Again, it's a similar thing where there was a compliant procurement process. It's just where the Fusion system has come on board, some purchase orders got through without being linked to contract entries because we couldn't afford to hold things up in the future. That will be corrected. Which other ones do we have? I'm nearly there, Councillor Madam. And the only other aspects that we have above £100,000 were the ones that have come up previously, which are to do with out of area school placements, which again don't really fall under the public contract regulations. And the primary basis there is to get the pupil into the correct school environment rather than undertake a competitive exercise. So through looking at the report, and I sincere apologies to the committee, I will send this out straight away afterwards. I have no concerns and actually have far less concerns than I've ever had coming to committee previously. Any questions before I move on to the next section?
If you carry on just dealing with the public paper. Sorry. Yeah.
Okay. So the next section of the report deals with spend which has been linked to waivers. The waivers that I generally focus on are the ones which carry the highest levels of risk, and that is where we have failed to advertise in line with regulations or our own contract procedure rules, and where we've effectively undertaken a direct award. So that's what I've focused upon primarily. We are still seeing a high number of waivers, but the reason for the waivers is kind of changed really. We've seen a lot of business as usual waivers. I think that is primarily down to the high visibility we have of low value contracts through the fusion system, but I need to do a bit more investigation. I think the largest amount of waivers that we're seeing now that are coming through procurement is down to where we've got a significant backlog of tenders that we need to get addressed. So particularly in social care, in housing, where we had works that couldn't be undertaken whilst residents were in situ. So the lift contract would be an example of those. We couldn't effectively tender those works whilst we were in the pandemic at its peak. That's why we've had to extend some contracts out of scope, and all those contracts are now being dealt with, and a number of them are already out to procurement that are subject to these waivers. But we do have that backlog to get through. What we're doing on that is not chasing compliance at the expense of putting a contract in place that could last a number of years for a high value that actually doesn't get the best benefit for us on a best value basis. So we're taking a pragmatic approach to get them out to the market, but make sure it's out in the market in the best form. Shall I continue, Councillor Madden? Okay. We do also have some pressure on my service at the moment as well, where there has been a lot of government funding which is becoming available, and again that's meaning that we're not chasing compliance as far as maybe we would like to, because that could also become at the expense of us providing support into services to help obtain funding from central government and other means. So examples of that is the levelling up funding. Every bid has required a detailed procurement contracting strategy. If we don't provide the support onto that, then that means that effectively that part of the bid can't go through, and potentially we miss out on significant funds. That's just one example, but there is a lot of funding that's coming in, and if we're not pragmatic and we purely focus on compliance, we could miss out on significant levels of funding. A lot less waivers now in response to COVID-19, and a lot less waivers in response, just generally in response to COVID-19. There's still some that are carrying on. It could be argued as to whether they are directly in response or not. A large part of those waivers come down to the work that we're doing to continue providing vouchers for pupils over summer holidays. So that came about from the pandemic, but it's work that has continued past that. Other work is to do in respect of continuing to improve in respect of homeless support. So the work that's been done to purchase and bring premises up to standard, continue with important kind of security and stewardship arrangements that we want to have continuity on in the interest of service users and the community. We do also have some waivers that are due to Brexit, primarily to do with the port, where we've got significant works that are required there to for the border control posts and various other aspects as we've departed from the European Union. From those waivers, there's not many there that cause any particular concern. While some of them are of high value, we do have a level of comfort under the regulations due to competition largely being absent for technical reasons, partly down to land interests, so that we couldn't use any other operator because the operation has to take place on a particular piece of land that the operator has the interest in, or down to the need to have consistent systems between us and other significant operators at the port. Otherwise we lose audit trail and potentially put significant risk into operations. Any questions in respect of any particular waivers? I won't go through every single one in detail, Councillor Madden, because we will be here for some time, but more than happy to answer any questions on any particular ones that are mentioned in the report.
Thanks for that, Richard. Have you finished? I can't quite hear you sometimes, Richard.
Apologies. Is that better now?
That's better, thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you. Have you finished the public paper? Or a bit more to do on that?
Well, the only other aspect of the public paper is in respect of the key performance indicators, the contract management. Yeah. Again, I'll go through that quickly. We only have 2 contracts which have shown as red. and there is some detail there within the paper regarding those, which I can provide more detail on when we come into the private session. No significant concerns there. The only thing that we do need to address, which we'll put the focus on now that we have moved through the first aspects of Fusion, is to make sure that more of these KPIs are actually being scored across the board. The ones that are being scored I don't have any major significant concerns on, but we do need to get better visibility across the board in terms of contract management going forward.
So the left one. Thank you, Richard. On the white paper, members, are there any questions? Any points people would like to make? Since it's on the white paper and since there's a lot of it in the other one, the KPIs, when you mentioned at the very end of KPI, key performance indicator, yes, for members that had to work that out for themselves. KPI never scored. What are the circumstances where we never, and some of them are lots of money, but what are the circumstances when we don't have a KPI not scored?
There can be a few circumstances around that. It can be because the KPI instance hasn't come up yet. So typically on a works contract, if it's a big school extension or a new build, we will have one KPI at what we term as practical completion, when the works have been complete, to assess how they've performed in respect of programme, delivery to budget and the quality of the build. And then we'll do a subsequent KPI post-defects to make sure that a year later everything is as it should have been. So that drives quite a few of the KPIs that were never scored just because the instance hasn't come up. Sometimes it will be down to the KPI effectively going past the date that it should have been scored on, and they are some of those ones that we need to address. We're going to be in the process of bringing in some additional resource into procurement that we can focus on to contract management. We don't have a dedicated contract management officer at the moment. When we do have that person in place, then one of the things we'll be doing is, one, simplifying the KPI scoring, because we currently have 3 KPIs, which confuses people and can sometimes give an excuse not to do the score in the first place, and also make it that much more accurate and easy for us to report on. But they're the 2 general instances, one that it hasn't come up or that it's gone past the date in which it should have been done.
Okay, members, can we now exclude the press and public officially? I have to wait for them to go, don't I? Okay, we're now into the appendix, which is in the orange paper. 2 minutes? Or?